this computer.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're now recording. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
excellent.
Okay, great. Well, good to talk to you, David. We're
Likewise.
just going to talk about your book, which comes out next week, Nazi Billionaires, The Dark History of Germany's Wealthiest Dynasties. Could you just give me a little background about your own journalism career?
Sure.
How did you like lead up to how you came to this topic?
Yes, I will. So I started working for Bloomberg News in late November 2011, and it was literally the week after Zuccotti Park, after Occupy Wall Street was forcibly removed from Zuccotti Park, and it was really kind of the height, or in a way, the beginning of the 1% versus the 99%, or when that slogan at least was popularized. And I began on a team which focused on family-owned, non-stock exchange listed companies, and like focusing on billion-dollar fortunes, family offices, hidden wealth. And I was hired as one of the, it was a new team, and I was hired as one of the US reporters, or at least one of the reporters covering the US or North America. But because I'm Dutch, I mean, I was born and raised in Amsterdam, they soon asked me if I could cover the German-speaking countries. And as I described in the book, I was a little bit, I didn't tell my bosses that, I didn't dare tell my bosses that at that point, but I was a little bit, I didn't really feel like covering the German-speaking countries because, as a native Dutchman, I was probably the last of my generation, which had this kind of playful antagonism against the Germans, and also which was compounded by my family's own experience during the war. My grandfather was tried to flee to the United Kingdom, and he was an avid sailor, but he's together with his best friend, their sailboat blew back to shore, and they were arrested by German soldiers, and they were convicted as political prisoners and sentenced to 2 years doing slave labor in a steel factory in Bochum, in the Ruhr area. And my grandfather was 6'7", and he came out weighing 90 pounds. And from my father's side, my father's grandparents were Jewish, or my father's parents were Jewish, and my grandfather hid in Amsterdam for 3.5 years, and my grandmother with my aunt fled to Switzerland, my grandmother was Swiss. She fled with my aunt, who was 3 years at the time, to the French-Swiss border, together with a companion. They were detained by the Gestapo officers. Gestapo officer took pity on my aunt and grandmother, or my grandmother with her young baby or with her young child, and they were let off, which was a miracle. But her companion was deported to Sobibor and murdered there. And my grandmother and aunt made it over the border, over the mountains, and into Switzerland, a safe haven. So I wasn't really up for covering the German-speaking countries. And my grandfather, the one who spent 2 years doing slave labor in Germany, always made jokes about the Germans and said, you should never take them seriously because they take themselves so seriously. But I actually, when I started the beat, very soon I started taking the Germans very seriously, particularly those in big business and finance, and not only because of the swaths of the global economy that they control and the massive brands, not only in the car industries. It's not only BMW, Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, etc., but also for the massive family offices they control, and the basis of the many companies that they've been at, Allianz, Munich Re, Dr. Oetker, a big conglomerate now carved into two conglomerates. And I started diving into these stories which mixed the financial and the historical. And what I soon discovered was there is this, Germany has a pretty wide culture of remembrance when it comes to the Third Reich. A very, a very celebrated, well, celebrated in the sense that it's, for the past 5 decades, it's been very good. But the corporate reckoning is very much out of step with that, in the sense that these families, some of these families at least, pretend that they have reckoned with it, but then actually continue whitewashing their histories in very subtle but insidious ways. Where BMW and Porsche maintain foundations in the name of their saviors and celebrate them for their business success, but do not mention their Third Reich era crimes. So, it seems that in every case, morality, business success is trumping morality. And, the driving argument of my book is also is historical transparency, is saying, well, if you celebrate somebody for their business success, you should also be transparent about their Third Reich crimes and activities and affiliations and sympathies.
And in Germany, is there any kind of movement afoot to bring that kind of accountability to the business world? Like, I mean, are there people out there saying there needs to be reparations and things like that?
So compensation was paid. There was this in 2000. There was this. So after the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain fell, and the Berlin Wall came down too, and Germany was reunified, and the Soviet Union disintegrated. You had millions of forced enslaved laborers, particularly from the former Soviet Union, who started demanding, compensation for having been deported, into Germany, working forcibly, having been rounded up during the war and forcibly, having had to work as forced or slave laborers in German factories and mines and whatnot. At the same time, in the US, you have all these class action lawsuits starting against big German companies. This is all happening in the 1990s. So both of these movements kind of converge, and an agreement is made between the American government and the US government in 1999, which sets up in which the German government agreed together with the German business world to set up a compensation fund for forced enslaved laborers, which comes into effect in 2000. And most of the families, not all, but most of the families I write about in my book have paid into a compensation into that fund. So that's not really the issue. The issue of compensation has kind of been dealt with. Even though there's the clause in the agreement that, of course, they didn't accept any kind of liability of any kind of responsibility for the actions of their companies, which covered the entire German business world. What happens now is that, every year, like clockwork, some kind of investigative media story breaks in Germany about, business family X with their dark Nazi past and the activities of the patriarchs who were Nazi party members, SS members, donors to the SS, etc., using X amount of forced enslaved laborers in their companies, mass producing weapons, acquiring Jewish-owned companies far below market value, or appropriating companies of those who lived in Nazi-occupied territories. What then happens is a standard response. So we're going to commission a study. We're going to, we've asked this a history professor to commission, to investigate. We're opening our archives to this historian and his team of researchers. It's going to be this academic study, and that's it. And then you don't hear about it for 3-4 years. So kind of the uproar, the controversy is pacified, right? And then 4 years, 3-4 years later, you have one of these studies in dense academic German published, which is incredibly thorough and good, but the findings are kind of hidden in plain sight because these are read in German academic, in dense academic German. These studies are more than 1,000 pages. So it doesn't actually reckon with any of the victims, right? The question is, who is this reckoning with? I mean, it's not with the Germans. I mean, they, for the most part, were not the victims.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that these business families, business interests were global then and now, most of these, bar a few exceptions of companies, most of these studies never are translated into other languages. So it's very much contained, and it leans also on a sense of German culpability by these families very handily, saying, "Oh, we're all guilty," I mean, so what can the Germans, can there be any more moral outrage about that? So it's a very clever way of keeping of hiding the details in plain sight, and then pretending afterwards like nothing's happened. So then you continue on with the BMW Herbert Quandt Foundation. Herbert Quandt was the patriarch of Germany's wealthiest family. The BMW Quandts, siblings, Stefan Quandt and Susanne Klatte, who own about 47% of BMW already for decades. And they maintain, or BMW maintains, this foundation in the name of their father, celebrating him. The only line on the biography is that he saved BMW from bankruptcy in 1959, but fails to admit, but admits the fact that he, built or that he planned, built, and dismantled a sub-concentration camp in Nazi-occupied Poland, or that he acquired companies in France seized from Jews, or that he had the responsibility over over battery factories in Berlin that kept, among other people, hundreds of female slave laborers from concentration camps who were kept there in the most horrific circumstances. So it's a whitewash, similarly with the Ferry Porsche Foundation by Porsche.
And I think also, I mean, what you did obviously is you take something that could be a dense academic, study, but you made it into a kind of propulsive narrative investigative work. So I would imagine this is going to be very disconcerting for these companies, because it's going to really bring these connections to a global audience, whereas maybe a lot of these discussions you're talking about are happening in German in a kind of safe manner, right?
Exactly. That's also what I think their aim is to have it contained to Germany. Hence, because there it's easy to, as I said before, it's easy to pacify the discussion there because everyone is guilty.
Yeah. I mean, do you find that, like, how many people in the world that you run across know that there's this kind of really disconcerting, dark chapter to some of the great German businesses? I mean, it's probably not even that well known when you meet people in America or England or whatever, right?
No, it's not. I mean, everybody always comes up with the reference Hugo Boss, which I didn't even look into Hugo Boss. There was no family behind it, or there is no family behind it. There may have been. I'm sure there was a Hugo Boss at some point. But that's always the first reference everybody comes up with. That's so, for some reason, that's so instilled in collective memory that because Boss created the SS uniform, but so did with the Quants. They also had massive textile factories, and they also created all these uniforms, but had all these other interests which were far more egregious and it's funny how there is that disconnect. Also because they don't know the families behind these brands, right? They don't know the controlling families behind BMW, behind Porsche, behind Volkswagen, behind Audi. It's not only that, it's also Mini, Rolls-Royce, Lamborghini, Bentley, Seat, Skoda. I mean, you can go on and on.
And so obviously this was a couple of years in the making, I guess. I mean, when did you
Yes,
start the
4 years.
project? 4 years. So can you just kind of walk us through what made this a difficult project for you as a journalist? You know, what were the challenges that you were up against, and sort of how did you handle those?
I think the main challenge, well, there are two main challenges. The first one is I'm native Dutch. I'm writing a book in English based on German sources on what is a very highly sensitive and secretive topic. So it took 4 years of all my wits and being extremely careful and diligent about doing the reporting and doing the research, the archival research, primary source research, secondary source research. I needed to make sure that everything was right. That was the main challenge in terms of breadth and time. Secondly, the other challenge is bar one air, no one wanted to talk to me. Not the families themselves, not the people around them, whether it was, lawyers, family offices, some of their spokesmen, whether it was from their family offices or their companies, responded to my questions, but mostly I got no comments.
And how is this project received as you were working on it? I mean, you'd have to tell people you're working on a book kind of in this
Sure.
topic. What were the kind of responses you got from everybody that you told about this project in Germany?
Well, I
especially?
moved. So I moved from New York to Berlin in late 2017 to initiate the research and writing for the book. And I think even in Germany, the topic isn't it's known, but people are like, yeah, everybody was involved, but it's still what I'm focusing on, the 5 families that I'm focusing on, or the 5 families that I picked, are those that are still relevant in the global economy today, right? I mean, there's many more families. The Groups and the Thyssen's are always, from what is now ThyssenKrupp, are 2 other major examples, but there are no families, there are no heirs anymore, or these relevant heirs anymore to with regards to the fortune. So I picked those 5 families, and a lot of people, even in Germany, they find it fascinating because they know so little about it themselves. Oh wait, you
Yeah,
muted.
sorry. I think it's interesting. I've been working on a project related to North Korea and spending a lot of time talking to South Koreans. And there's also kind of a similar proximity problem where if it's really close to you, in a way, it's almost the least explored or discussed thing in a funny way. Like people don't like to, sorry.
Oh, good.
Sorry. Did you hear what I just said now? Or did I get cut
Yeah,
off?
about South Korea.
Yeah,
South Korea.
I would say there's a kind of lack of introspection in a way, because it's omnipresent, and it sometimes it takes a foreigner to come in and take that slightly different perspective, right?
Right.
But I can imagine it's quite sensitive, very sensitive.
Yeah.
Also, people are probably questioning your motives, things like that, right?
Totally. Well, I don't know. I mean, not to me at least, or like not in my face, but probably, or perhaps behind my back. But I do. I mean, I started reporting for Bloomberg on this topic. I mean, that's how it all came about. I would report these stories from. The nucleus of the book forms these stories that I reported for Bloomberg between 2012 and 2018 about the book, and they found, I noticed a big resonance in an English, in the English language world, reading world. And it struck me how little known these stories were to a wider audience, to global, or not known at all. First, and secondly, how what happens in Germany is, you recently saw that with the example of the editor-in-chief of Bild, who was accused of sexual harassment. There was this internal investigation, and Axel Springer kept him on until the moment that Ben Smith wrote a column about it for the New York Times, and within 24 hours, 6 months after the internal investigation had been finished, and all this was he was known that he was, that he had sexually harassed women, or it was at least shown. He was fired. The reason is that Axel Springer had just bought Politico for $1 billion, and suddenly the story had spread beyond Germany, and then you finally have a reaction. But as long as it's contained to Germany, especially these powerful corporations, whether it's BMW, Porsche, or Axel Springer, they feel that, well, what can they really do to us? Because there's also this sense in Germany, it's difficult writing about it as German reporters, also because these companies, they're quite strict press laws. You have every interview you need to get approved by some flag. I mean, it's a very different. You have far more freedom as a reporter, as a reporter in the US, reporting on such German stories, and likely in the UK as well, than you have within Germany.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so the reviews so far, like there was a Wall Street Journal one yesterday, great. Yeah. What's the reception so far in Germany, in German media, about the arrival of this book?
No, nothing.
This book doesn't exist. Yeah,
exactly. The German translation is but that is also typical German. It always takes a long time for things to real. It's an insular country. I mean, it's a big country. It's like the US, it's inward facing. Despite the fact that it's the heart of the European project politically, it's the motor of the European economy. It's one of the largest economies in the world. It is a very insular country, in many ways still quite provincial. And they don't really, and you also saw that with some of the revelations that came out around the Wirecard affair, where the German regulator has a press clipping but doesn't have any of it still has a press clipping every day that they get delivered in paper, but it has none of the English speaking media, because they all don't speak English. I mean, that is like kind of, for me, that's like peak Germany to me. It's really, it goes to show kind of the way it's still so old fashioned and conservative in many ways. So for this story to land in Germany, well, the German translation is being published May 5th, and we'll see what happens once it gets published there, or whether it gains any traction in the run up to that publication.
Yeah,
I don't expect it to, but we'll see.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Maybe you could just say a little bit about your next adventure, so that
sure.
people keep an eye on what you're up to next.
Yeah, I'm actually moving to the Middle East in June. I'll be reporting on the Middle East from Tel Aviv for the Dutch Financial Daily, a daily newspaper, the Netherlands' only daily financial newspaper. It's actually the first time in my career that I'll be writing in my native language. So I look forward to that, and I very much look forward to getting to know the region better.
And will you be doing mostly business and finance coverage in that region? Yes. Okay, great.
Yeah.
That'd be very exciting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on to speak to our whale hunting audience. Very nice to have you here.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Bradley.